Welcome to Compliance Uncomplicated, an interview series dedicated to simplifying the unnecessarily complex world of risk and compliance. Hosted by Drata experts, each episode will tell a new story about high-growth startups and other brands that are building compliance pathways towards a culture of security. Every business, industry, and team has unique challenges when it comes to building trust. And for many startups, compliance is one of the first stepping stones towards that pathway. In each episode, we'll hear from founders, visionaries, and those tasked with building a foundation of trust for their brand. It's time to unravel the jargon and abbreviations and uncomplicate compliance.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Compliance Uncomplicated, a Drata podcast about startups and other companies who are using compliance to build security-first cultures and help accelerate their business goals. My name is Alexa Ovenshire. I am the marketing specialist over at Drata. Super excited to be one of your hosts for today. I am also joined by Helena, our community lead. Hello, Helena. How are you?
Hey, Alexa. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Do you want to give a little background to the folks listening about who you are and what you do at Drata?
Sure. So my name is Helena, and I am the Senior Community Strategist here at Drata. I'm responsible for building community, facilitating conversations like these, getting our experts in to connect with people in the industry and like-minded individuals about things that are relevant on their compliance journey.
Amazing. And we are also joined by compliance royalty today. I am super excited to have this person on the podcast. Rick, hello, how are you?
Hey, Alexa, and hello, everyone. Like Alexa mentioned, I am one of the compliance experts here at Drata. I'm a former auditor, but I've also been a software developer and a security engineer, which is sort of where my experience comes, in from, for compliance. And what I do at Drata is I help our customers as they're going through whatever their compliance journey is, whether that's SOC 2 or ISO, and help to answer any questions they might have as they're going through, the audit process, whether that's getting ready or, during the audit or even after the audit. But with us here today, I am pleased to introduce a good friend of mine. I'm going to present to you Max, the Information Security Manager over at Nemean Services. However, I'm not sure how accurate that is because, Max, I know you've recently been given some additional responsibility for Mitmark as well as some of their subsidiaries. So how's it going, Max?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Nice build up there, Rick, so thanks for that one. So I'm the Information Security Manager at Nemean Services. I'll get more into what Nemean is later, and I'm also recently been promoted to the Information Risk Assurance Manager for the Mitmark Group as a whole. So Nemean is part of the Mitmark Group. It is kind of the black sheep just because it's so unique what it does, whereas the other one are a lot more traditional in terms of the areas and security. So there's Mitmark Topco, then we also have Mitmark Security, which has a lot of things like man guarding, physical security systems. There's Mitmark Health, sort of paramedic training, that sort of thing. And then Mitmark Intelligence, which does a lot of sort of corporate intelligence OSINT, which sort of where I started, though originally these were all part of Mitmark, but as Mitmark has expanded, it's now spun them out into different subsidiaries. So, I suppose that's my basic intro about me, myself, and I.
Awesome. So congratulations on your promotion, Max.
Thank you. Clearly, I'm barking up the right tree.
Well, I wanted to know a little bit more about your history. Can you walk us through how your career led you to cybersecurity?
Well, I suppose like most people in cybersecurity at the moment, there's not really there are many different pathways, and mine is as squiggly as anyone else's. So I started off as an OSINT analyst and investigator. So I started working for Mitmark while I was at university, and essentially I needed a job. I happened to find out about Mitmark. I met with Rich, the owner and CEO, and he clearly liked me, so he brought me on. I started off sort of doing like a couple of days a week, and I just, at the beginning, it was when Mitmark was much smaller, I'd basically do a pile of odd jobs, so it's whatever needs to be done I'd assist with. So that meant going out with Ed, who runs Mitmark Security, going out to him to sort of, I know, do check out places that want to have security systems put in, helping do the ordering and procurement. But eventually I got into do the OSINT analyst piece as we started to do that. So that included doing things like digital vulnerability risk assessments for like sort of high net worth individuals. So finding out what's out there, how can they protect themselves, writing security and operational procedures for clients that were sort of breaking into new fields. And yeah, it was going well up until there was a small event that occurred in the beginning of 2020. I'm sure you guys may have heard about it. A strange virus of unknown origin came into being, and suddenly the entire UK economy was frozen overnight, and there was not that much OSINT work. So and this is where, to be fair, Rich, the businessman, sort of comes into his own, because he's the sort of man that can make an opportunity out of anything. The complete opposite of myself. I think it's where we balance each other. For every bit that I am risk averse, he is, I wouldn't say pro risk, but he's more willing to put himself out there, let's say, which in this case is why, again, it's why he owns the business and I just work for him. But no, so he ended up getting us in with a startup called Pisa Testing. So that was doing a lot of testing. Then I was put on, and what I helped with was the data management and also helping with a lot of the procedural stuff. So that sort of got me into the more compliance background as my first experience working with big sets of quantitative data. Then again, Rich actually managed to then get Pisa the contract with UEFA for, I believe it was the UEFA Champions League for that year. So then I was basically going around helping run teams at basically TV studios, going out to the actual football club. So I think went up to Aberdeen, went out to Wales and to Swansea, if I remember correctly. Swansea or Newport. I mean, the Welsh football fans that are into compliance and are watching this are probably tearing their hair out at me right now. Yeah, Chelsea, FC, those sort of things. And basically we did that for about a year, and that's what got me into the data side. Then when we came back, because of during the COVID, cryptocurrency really took off. And it just so happened that one of Mitmark's big customers, and again, Rich happened to know them because I believe he went to Sandhurst with one of their sort of executive team. And that's how it started there. We got the contract to do their physical security at not even their old office, but their old office. And then we also started doing a lot of the due diligence for them. But around this time, we'd also started doing crypto scams. The reason is over COVID, crypto scams was, and we got our first potential case. And basically, this is what really started, and this is where Mitmark Intelligence sort of specialised. And this is back in early 2021, so about 2 years ago. Then after that, the custodian in question came up to him and said, "We really like you guys. We've actually started this new system called multi-party computation." Now, for non-crypto people, what that means essentially is when you make a wallet for like an investment, if you imagine you're a crypto investment company, you work with a custodian. Traditionally, it used to work with something called multi-sig, where you'd essentially have two keys, you sign on, and then basically you each sign off on it, and that's how you allow the trade. Then what happened is one of the world's biggest crypto companies lost one of their keys for a client and had to settle out of court for tens of millions, because the way the blockchain works is if you lose that key, you can't, the blockchain is kind of like its own realm of existence. You can't like hack into it like a hard drive and get those assets back. Once they're gone, they're what's known as dead coin. You just can't recover them. So MPC, multi-party computation, was adopted, and we started offering what's known as a trusted third-party service. However, it became very apparent very quickly that Mitmark wasn't really geared for it in the way we'd want it to be. Mainly because I think the amount of work we were quoted to do in a year, we ended up doing in the first 3 weeks, just because the company, the custodian, really took off. So what we started doing, we realized, well, hang on a minute, rather than putting all this effort into Mitmark, which kind of needs to be able to do other things, etc., why don't we create a new company? So that's where Nemean Services was spun off, and that's where Nemean was founded. And then basically I then started with ISO 27001. Then when we realized we started to work with bigger firms, they wanted things like SOC 2 reports, and we realized again we'd have to, and it's just interesting watching just how much it evolved from the sort of conception through. And as I went through, I did various qualifications and training courses. We needed a compliance automation tool, which is how we got into Drata, after a long and lengthy process of going through the various competitors to work out who would be the best one there. And that pretty much now, yeah, so I did all of the ISO 27001, did the SOC 2. I've then now been given the opportunity to do the same for the subsidiaries where it's needed. So at the moment, Mitmark Intelligence, due to the nature of it being basically a private investigation and a corporate intelligence company, with the sort of GDPR requirements, things like that, that's where I'm sort of primarily focusing on at the moment, as well as sort of continuing to oversee the day-to-day for Nemean. So, yeah, that's where I currently am.
So did you started your career with Mitmark
Yeah,
then?
as I said, I started from Mitmark at university when I was younger, more wide-eyed,
Wow.
less jaded to the world. And then, the brutal reality of GRC has, molded me into the shell of a man I am now.
So I'm curious how, since you started your career with Mitmark, when you became the information security manager at Nemean Services, did you feel like you were starting from scratch learning about compliance, or did you feel like your previous experience with Mitmark it was like a natural segue?
It was a mix of the two, to be honest. So obviously doing all the crypto, because I'd done the research into the crypto fraud, I was very aware of what the risks were, and I had a big insight from a defensive footing anyway, because when you do things like the digital vulnerability risk assessments, we'd be advising, okay, here's how you protect yourself. And so it was very similar there. Same with the data management side of when I was working at Pisa for MIT, when I'd been contracted out from Mitmark to Pisa during the pandemic. Overall, a mix of the two. It was a bit of a leap. There were times, especially, that I got massive imposter syndrome, and I'm like, oh my god, I feel very overwhelmed, very daunted. But I think I had to then start to basically learn to judge myself by my results, and then also learn to be comfortable with basically managing myself in the sense of setting my own tasks and being responsible to myself and keeping deadlines and making sure that I was on project and I was keeping management updated, etc., etc.
So, Max, with your background starting in Mitmark Intelligence, are there any interesting, like you said, crypto fraud really just exploded during the pandemic, obviously. What about working at Mitmark Intelligence kept you interested in security?
Just looking at the nature of the scams, how these things, because often it's not individuals, it's big sort of criminal organizations and things like that. So yeah, it's a very fascinating industry. It's always constantly moving. As I said, much like the way that I explain to people, think like an RSMS, think of these more as living things that are constantly evolving and changing. And as a result, it's always good to be in that, because it means that you're always evolving and changing with it as well.
So I want to segue a little, but speaking of scams and talking about your role a little bit more as information security manager. So at Drata, we operate very much that, security is everybody's job at the company. So even though I'm someone, who works in marketing and my day-to-day roles and responsibilities are not linked to security at all, I still very much feel a sense of responsibility to the company. It's almost like how important it is to the company. So it becomes even more important to you to be very diligent. And if you see something, say something, or if you click on something, definitely say something. So I'm curious, as someone whose role is directly tied to the security of your company, do you sort of feel any pressure with that?
Well, I think any information security manager that isn't stressed constantly is doing their job wrong. I mean, because you have to, the whole point, it's just the mentality you get into. I think you have to keep a certain amount of pressure, because it's sort of if you become lax, if you're not keeping on top of it, that's where things can go wrong. And touch wood, it doesn't happen, but we haven't had a breach, and that's because we are very on top of things. And basically, it's better to overkill than underkill when it comes in. And when in doubt, it's better to be safe than sorry, and that's very much the attitude you have to take.
The saying, no risk, no reward, doesn't really apply to information security. You don't really want your security manager to have that opinion.
And that's the key thing, is it's not just being a no voice, it's also being constructive. It's working with people. Because if I just came in and said you can't do it, because you need to, as you said earlier, actually, you need to have that sort of ethos. You need to build it into people that everyone is a stakeholder and everyone is responsible. So it's educating people, it's making people aware, but again, it's working with them.
And people do want to help. If they know the why behind something, they're generally pretty amenable to being a part of it. We do want to transition a little bit into talking about Nemean, and I know that Alexa and Helena have
Yep.
some questions for you.
We know that that Nemean Services specializes in storage, security, and audit of digital assets. So I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more about what digital asset security is to anyone who may not be familiar and is listening.
So there's a lot of confusion because we're not a custodian. We don't actually hold cryptocurrency. What we hold what's known as a key shard file. Different custodians have different names for it. So I'll just refer to them as key shard files or shards for the sake of this for simplicity. And again, there is a lot of me oversimplifying here, but just so basically anyone can get an understanding of it. So this comes back to MPC, as I explained earlier, multi-party computation. When the custodian and the client create the sort of the wallets they're going to be and the vaults that they're going to be trading out of, at the point of creation, the MPC requires 3 parties, and at any one time, basically, it works on a 2 of 3 model whereby the 3 key shard files are created. And essentially, if you think of the blockchain as a map, each of these 3 is a set of coordinates. You need 2 of these coordinates to say, right, here it is, cool, that's your proof of ownership. And essentially, or if you want to be more literal, you can imagine a safe that has 2 key slots. You need 2 keys at any one time. Most of the time, we'll just sit in the background. The clients will tend to only really speak to us when they're either 1, setting up, 2, when they want to create additional wallets for trading, or, for example, in the case of an asset recovery, and that can be in the form of something as simple as they've lost their key. But the whole point is, or that something's happened, like maybe the custodian has collapsed and it's a full-on disaster recovery, and we have to actually then recover the assets and basically facilitate a one-off trade to move the assets from that wallet to a new wallet so that the assets aren't lost. And that's what it comes down to. It's multi-party computation, 3 keys. We hold the spare key. We have basically, if we have a TPA contract, so we have a tri-party agreement, we have a contract with both the custodian and the client, and basically that has the term, basically all the definitions of, right, when are we allowed to do it with the client, when are we allowed to do it with the custodian. In most cases, if it's a simple recovery, the custodian will be involved, but there are also, for example, if the custodian were to collapse, how long could go by before we could say, okay, right, they've definitely collapsed, we can now initiate disaster recovery for all the clients. And that's essentially what Nemean does in terms of digital asset security. We are, and that's why, again, so we are the assets we store, and we store everything cold offline, are those basically the data surrounding those shard file keys, and that's what we're there for. We are there as an insurance policy and to be, again, a trusted third party for both the custodian and the client.
I know we've talked about this, on some of our calls, Max, but how do you see Nemean growing, as digital assets become more popular? Like, I know we've, talked about potentially other offices. We've talked about other partners that you guys are onboarding. Like, what do you see in Nemean's future?
So more custodians will be the big one. So as I said, we are talking to new custodians at the moment to get that up and running, which is always good. Then there's also, again, potential assets. So we did look into doing NFT storage. That would have required us, I think we were looking at the regulatory requirements at the time, saying, okay, well, if we are going to start actually storing NFTs physically, we will need to then get, I think the FCA does have requirements for basically being registered with them. However, it then ended up falling through. As you guys may know, there was a little bit of a burst in the NFT market, and it sort of died a bit of a death, really. I mean, this is where it gets into as well. NFT is a great example of, it's where the technology goes, really, and that's where it's difficult to predict, because, I mean, you go back to go back to 2008 and try and explain Bitcoin to someone. Go back to the 1980s and explain how the internet is going to change absolutely everything, and basically going to see a 4th industrial revolution based around like the automation. Let's try and explain something like chatbot GPT or something 10 years ago, or something like the Mid-Journey art AI generator. Like we are in a fascinating time of technology, and admittedly it is a time, as again being a risk manager, to be cautious, but it's also a time to think, okay, where can this go, and where are the new business opportunities? And sometimes they'll work. I do think, personally, I know there are a lot of naysayers. I do think cryptocurrency trading, when you treat it as a commodity, as most do, I do think it has a future, especially so long as it is an alternate, stable form of commodity trading. However, then you get things like NFTs, where they're basically a flash in the pan, but then again, that underlying technology,
it's speculation driven.
Basically, yeah. And that's why I said, so long term, I couldn't tell you, but I think essentially anything that can be used as proof of ownership or as something that can be tied to some sort of tangible asset. So in the same way that cryptocurrency has an exchange to fiat currency, which I know they're loosely tangible, but for example, you're seeing people talk about the use of NFTs in the wine industry, for example. People buy NFTs, but those NFTs are actual basically proof of ownership of physical wine, or people talking about using NFTs to buy houses and things. And that sort of use of NFTs as, again, non-fungible tokens for the like proof of ownership in a digital sense, I could see that becoming quite a big thing. There's also potential for things like escrow services, so basically proof of assets and using sort of blockchain technology for that, and that could be somewhere potentially that I could see Nemean going down the route of. My job is then, for any new opportunity, how do we make it secure? How do we make it safe? And that's my main goal.
So I want to move ahead to compliance a little bit, and get into really what this podcast is about. So Max, can you explain what compliance is in very, very basic terms for us?
Okay, so in the most basic way I would explain it would be essentially compliance is making sure that everyone is following the rules and no one gets in trouble. And if I was going to then get more complex on that, I'd say essentially it means that you have a clear defined scope and process for everything, and that everything has been tried and is constantly tried and tested to make sure that risk is minimized. And that's how I would explain it in its more simple terms.
That was a very good answer. Well, this is also your job, so I would expect a good answer
As I said,
from
this
you.
is the main thing, is that ultimately most of my job is actually, I'd say, communication. It's explaining, because it's very easy, especially like I've gotten so used to sort of read legalese of long, lengthy, GDPR is a 260 odd page nightmare, but it's being able to not only understand it, but understand it well enough that I can then communicate it to other people who don't really have time to sit through long, lengthy sort of they don't want to hear me saying this is the winter of my discontent, where the GDPR does rise over the sunset, Hoth, all that sort of pseudo Shakespearean nonsense that I think sort of loses people. Because again, you've got to keep people engaged. You've got to explain it to them, and if people don't understand it, I think it's the rule of three. People will ask three questions before they sort of awkwardly don't bother asking again, and will sort of nod and then pretend they understand, but they don't. They then become disengaged, and then I'm basically speaking to myself. So yeah, I think that's the key thing, is it's communication, make it easy to understand.
Well, if we're sticking on that topic, and because you did such a phenomenal job simplifying compliance, which is way better than I could do,
You're too kind.
obviously you work in security, and you had mentioned previously that, Nemean is essentially the BCP-DR services for crypto assets or, digital assets. Why do you think it's critical for Nemean to demonstrate that compliance?
I think it's a mix of multiple things, really. I mean, one is just competitive edge. We need to show that, listen, not only are we going to be good, we're going to be better than our potential competition. So that's a key reason why, is that demonstration and being able to talk through it. And that's also why getting, if all staff members have at least a basic understanding of it, when they're asked questions, they can give it. There's nothing less reassuring than when you ask a question, they say, they and ah, or they give an answer that's clearly nonsense. And also there's the risk as well of that if you're speaking in front of someone who's a potential stakeholder, let's say you don't realize you're speaking to the head of information security, and you give an answer that they can tell is clearly utter BS, that's quite dangerous. So there's that demonstration of knowledge of security, and again, that sort of from bottom up, from top to bottom, it's there, it's being drilled into our staff know what they're doing. Then there's also, again, the assurance. It's showing that, listen, we have been audited, here's our SOC 2 report, here shows what's been audited against, here's us proving that what we say we do is actually done, here's our ISO that shows we've got the, because again, that's the difference between SOC 2 and ISO, is ISO shows that we've got the framework, then the SOC 2 is the specifics about our actual system, which is why I think they go quite well together.
Yeah, and we know that you're taking an automated approach to compliance. So I wanted to know, what are your thoughts on continuous compliance versus the point-in-time compliance approach?
A snapshot in time is useless because, I mean, it's not useless. There are cases where that is useful. However, I think the reason why, because once you've got, and it says a lot in SOC 2, so SOC 2 for your sort of your standard organizational controls, once you've got your Type 2 report, no one wants to see your Type 1 report, because the Type 1 is a snapshot in time, whereas a Type 2 is an observation over a period. And the reason that's better is because it shows continuity. Anyone can really, I mean, if you're semi-competent, you can pull it together, pass a one-off audit. That's one of the reasons why we got SOC 2 on top of having the ISO, because the ISO, well, again, the ISO 27001 and the 27000 series in general is fantastic for what they do, but the SOC 2 is about the continuous assurance. And again, if you're treating your information security management systems as a living, breathing thing, in the same with that, you've got to have then a continuous compliance, because also, again, things are changing constantly. We've just seen ISO 27001 come out. There are new laws potentially being brought out. If you're not staying on top of these things, they'll mount up, and suddenly it'll be death by 1,000 cuts, because it'll be everything everywhere all at once, just caving in on top of itself. So, yeah, to have a healthy, fit for purpose information security management system, it has to be treated as if it's living. And again, the only way you can do that is with the continuous compliance, continuous observation.
Yeah, and Drata actually just recently released a 2023 compliance trends report. And in that report, 75% of companies said that achieving some level of continuous compliance, they felt that their program was more of a business driver, to speak to, what we're talking about right now. But I'm curious, Max, do you feel that compliance is, a trust building exercise, or maybe a revenue tool for sales? Or do you think it's somewhere in between? What are your thoughts there?
So I'd say that you've just described two sides of the same coin, very positive feedback cycle. One naturally fuels the other. And again, and by having trust, they're then willing to spend more money. And then by having more money, you can improve your systems, which builds more trust. And it's a very organic sort of symbiotic relationship. So again, I wouldn't even say it's in the middle. I'd say that you've pretty much described two parts of the same system.
Awesome. And congratulations again. I know you just finished up your Type 2 audit and your ISO surveillance audit. This will probably be the last question, before we give people and our listeners, some opportunity to figure out where they can learn more about Nemean. I'm going to go a little bit off script here. Do you think you possibly did your role a bit too well? Because you got Nemean SOC 2, you had a great ISO surveillance audit, and what have you recently been put in charge of, Max?
I mean, so saying, am I a victim of my own success? I mean, to be fair, I suppose that's sort of the goal, is you want to fall upwards, I suppose, rather than downwards, having achieved the audits, having built sort of a professional reputation for myself. I'd say that, I know, it fuels a very positive, again, it's a positive thing.
So, Max, where can people learn more about Mitmark and Nemean services who are listening?
So we're currently updating our website for Nemean, so we're transferring hosts at the moment. So at the moment, www.nemeanservices.co.uk, or just Google Nemean Services.
Max, it was a pleasure having you on the podcast. I certainly feel like I learned a lot. I know our listeners out there probably feel the same way. Thank you so much for joining us. Rick and Helena, thank you so much for co-hosting with me. And to all of our listeners, we will see you on our next episode of Compliance Uncomplicated. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks so
you,
much,
everyone.
Max.
Thank you for listening to Compliance Uncomplicated, a Drata podcast. To learn more about the series, go to drata.com/uncomplicated. Discuss this episode on our community secured at community.drata.com, or subscribe to our newsletter, Trusted, to stay up to date on the latest episodes.